Tom and Marcia are 62 and 60 years old. They live in Michigan. They've saved $2 million for retirement, and they are tired of Michigan winters, and they want to spend more of their time in better weather during those cold months. So they want to know whether or not they have saved enough for retirement. Now, they're very cautious in their finances. And so even though they're very excited to retire if possible, they're not going to do it if they are not reasonably confident that they're going to be able to live the rest of their lives without ever having to go back to work or depend on their children. So in today's video, we're going to analyze their retirement scenario, look at what they've saved, look at how sustainable their retirement really is, how much they can realistically spend, and maybe explore some of the options that they have available to them as far as Social Security and withdrawal rates. With all that in mind, let's get right into this video. So on the screen in front of us, we're looking at an overview of Tom and Marcia's overall financial situation. Like I said, they've saved $2 million, and that's broken up. Not all of that is in a retirement account. Some of that's in an IRA, some of it's in just a brokerage investment account that they have together, and some of it is in a Roth IRA. Now, they both have Social Security benefits available to them. Tom's full benefit, if he waits until age 67, is going to be $4,000 a month. And Marcia, if she waits until age 67, she'll get $2,500 a month. You can see from the Social Security benefits, Tom had more earnings during his career. You can't blame Marcia though. She took time out from the workforce to help raise kids, so makes sense, right? Now with this, obviously if they're retiring at age 62, that's what Tom is, and 60 Marcia, they're not gonna be able to get those benefits. So we wanna look at when should they claim those, what makes the most sense for an overall sustainable retirement plan. Now on the screen in front of us, you can see that we're looking at a retirement paycheck of $12,000 a month. And this is kind of their ideal monthly spending plan. If they had $12,000 a month, they could do basically, this covers all the contingencies that they could think of, which is basically, periodic repairs to the house, having a budgeted money for travel, having a little bit of extra money left over so they can help with their kids. They're in their 20s and 30s at this point, maybe wanting to help them or even some of their grandchildren that are coming into the picture at this point. So this is a really generous budget for them. We want to look at, okay, how realistic is this plan? And let's explore some other options. I also forgot to mention, Marcia also has a small pension. So she is going to get $800 a month, and luckily that starts right away at age 60, which is kind of what kicked off this, hey, could we actually retire now? So with all that in mind, let's go through everything and look at their current plan and then explore some scenarios, because one of the major challenges that retirees have is really trying to determine what is, first of all, do I have enough money? Is it realistic to retire at this point? Have I saved enough? And how much money can I realistically spend without the chance of running out of money? With that, let's look at the overall cash flow plan. So you can see that if they were to build their plan based on $12,000 a month adjusted for inflation, this is basically how their cash flow would line up, kind of where is the money coming from. So looking at the chart, you can see that each of these colors represents a different source of income. The dark blue is Marcia's pension, the light blue is her Social Security benefit, Tom's Social Security benefit is in yellow, and then finally taking money out of the overall portfolio, that here is in purple. So as you can see, early in retirement, it's pretty straightforward. They'd have to pull the majority of their income from the portfolio. They're spending it down, and with just a small amount coming from Marcia's pension. So at this point in retirement, you can see about $800 a month. And unfortunately, that pension does not adjust for inflation. It's just a flat amount. And this is a single life benefit. So if Marcia passes away, the benefit goes away. But looking at what's realistic, probably she'll live longer than Tom. So this is a claiming strategy that they feel comfortable with for Marcia's pension. So you can see that in the beginning of retirement, they'd be pulling out about over $11,000 a month from the portfolio. And that would continue all the way for several years until Marcia hits age 65. So 5 years into the future before they even start being able to get any Social Security benefit. Now, why did I choose these Social Security claiming ages? First of all, I chose 65 for Marcia and age 70 for Tom. The reason for that is we're trying to find the overall claiming strategy that's going to maximize their overall income and also give them the most financial security possible. And when we look at the different sources of income, in my opinion, Social Security income is superior to taking money from a portfolio, and I'll tell you why. Social Security, first of all, it's guaranteed by the government, and all the concerns about solvency of the Social Security system. I have another video where I talk a lot about Social Security and kind of the history of that, so I won't go into it right now, but I'll just say that we faced situations like this in the past, and the system has been repaired to make it financially viable for the future. So in this situation, where we have Tom with a larger full retirement age benefit, it's going to make sense for him to delay his benefit until age 70. What's great about that is that even if Tom were to pass pass away relatively early in retirement, let's say he passed away in his late 70s. Well, you might look at that and say, my goodness, his benefit, okay, he's only claiming it for a few years and then he passes away. Man, that was a bad idea. Well, maybe if we were looking just at Tom's life, but since we're looking at a joint plan, if Marcia continues to live on for another 10 years, 20 years, it's actually a great financial decision. If we look at both of their benefits from a household perspective, individually, that wouldn't make sense for Tom, but we're trying to, maximize overall financial security. And Tom and Marcia think of their finances as kind of a joint endeavor. And so for them, this makes sense. So Marcia would claim hers at 65. Now, her benefits can be reduced a little bit, but we chose that time specifically because we want to have maximum flexibility early in retirement for them to be able to qualify for affordable health insurance. And so if we have less guaranteed income sources in the beginning of retirement, it gives us a little more flexibility to plan for qualifying for Affordable Care Act, ACA, health insurance credits. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that in this video. I've got plenty of other videos and case studies where I go into a lot of depth and detail there. So this is the overall claiming strategy, overall kind of cash flow plan. Now, as far as overall financial security, what does this look like? Well, we can run a risk analysis and a lot of retirement planning softwares. I happen to use Income Lab. It's kind of a top of the line retirement income planning software that financial advisors use. But there's other great products out there. So, and most of them do this kind or a similar type of risk analysis. But essentially what the software is doing is we're looking at all of, historical data, basically looking at stock and bond markets going all the way back to 1870 and taking Tom and Marcia's plan and running it through a bunch of hypothetical scenarios. Well, what if they retired in 1870? What if they retired in 1970? What if they retired in, every time in between, and running 30-year retirement, hypothetical retirements. And based off of that, we can get an idea, obviously not a guarantee of what will happen in the future, but it gives us a good historical foundation to say, okay, is this planning strategy a strong strategy, or does it not work out most of the time? As you can see from running all of those scenarios, that 97% of the time, they were able to have that $12,000 a month adjusted for inflation. And in many of those scenarios, they were actually, if they wanted to, they could have had about 30% higher income than they planned. 30% of $12,000 a month is quite a bit. They could have a very comfortable retirement if they wanted. When we look at this red here, the way that this software presents the data, this doesn't mean they ran out of money. What this 3% here is saying is that in 3% of those scenarios, they needed to take a small downward adjustment in their income in order to keep their retirement going. Okay, so all right, so they need to take a downward adjustment. By what degree, right? If they needed to drop their spending by $10 a month, not a big deal. If they needed to drop their spending by $6,000 a month, that's kind of a big deal, right? We want to know. So this gives us the answer here. Well, on average, in the 3% of scenarios where they needed to take a downward adjustment in their spending, that downward adjustment was only about 2%. In the worst case scenario, there was one scenario out of the thousands where they needed to drop it by 9%, still not catastrophic. And since this spending plan already builds in some cushion for their ideal retirement, honestly, this wouldn't even be that big of a deal. But they're very, very conservative with their finances. They're very cautious, and they want to make sure that they're going to be strong. So you would look at this, and from just looking at these initial numbers, you might think, okay, this is a great plan. They're going to be very secure. And it is. I mean, if this is just what we're optimizing for, is just a bulletproof retirement plan, then okay, this is looking pretty good. But is this really the best plan? And are we being a little too cautious in our approach? Are they leaving money on the table? Well, let's look at their projected legacy. So with the projected legacy, essentially what we're saying is that if they follow this plan, how much money are they likely, based on history, to have after 35 years of retirement? Well, running all the scenarios, and what this is looking at is different market environments, really bad market environments, really terrific market environments, and kind of everything in between. So what's most likely is that following this type of plan, they would pass away after 35 years with about $7.8 million in their retirement savings, plus the value of their house. It's pretty incredible to think, they're going to more than triple their portfolio in retirement. That's probably what would happen with this plan. In the worst case scenario, they're probably still passing away with more money than they started with. Now, adjusted for inflation, the value of this money is going to be less in the future. But the point of showing this is that even with inflation taken into account, this is an extremely conservative plan. And I would say that most people, the way to maximize retirement is not to try and pass away with a giant pot of money. Most people think, I'd rather spend some of that or most of that while I'm alive and enjoy it or do stuff with it. Even if you're like, okay, I'm doing everything I want, you probably get more satisfaction out of maybe giving or helping people while you're alive versus just waiting until you die and letting your kids fight over it after you've passed away, right? So the overall idea here is that probably this is too conservative of a overall retirement spending plan. Now, one of the concerns they have is with withdrawal rates. And as you can see in the beginning of this plan, if we go back to the cash flow diagram, for the first several years of retirement, the majority of their distributions are coming from the portfolio. So one of the major concerns that they have looking at this overall retirement plan, in spite of that risk analysis that we just looked at, one of their major concerns is that early in retirement, this is a very high withdrawal rate for the portfolio from what they've learned over the years getting ready for retirement. So if you look at this, they're starting with about $2 million. And if we're pulling out $11,300 a month, that equals about a 7% withdrawal rate from the portfolio. And everything that they've read suggests that that is pretty high. In fact, you've heard of the 4% rule. So just going over, looking for some information on this from the internet. And I found this really helpful blog from Fidelity Investments. And you can see here looking at a chart of hypothetical withdrawal rate percentages, looking at market information going all the way back to 1926, all the way up through the 90s. And you can see that for most of the time, the maximum sustainable withdrawal rate based on the different dates of retirement. And so you can see that the 4%, why that ends up being the recommended approach is that in this analysis, they're using a 28-year retirement, but let's call it 28, let's call it 30 years. And basically all of the different time periods, a 4% withdrawal rate was a sustainable withdrawal rate. This retiree would not have run out of money. Assuming, of course, there's some assumptions in here. This is a well-diversified, balanced portfolio between stocks and bonds. And if you look at some of the original research on this from Bill Bengen, looking at allocations of somewhere around 50-50 stock to bonds or 75-25, so 75% stocks, 25% bonds, kind of in between that range, those were the asset allocation percentages that usually result kind of the sweet spot for being able to have a withdrawal rate that is higher and also sustainable. With all this in mind, we're looking at a scenario where we're contemplating a withdrawal rate of about 7%. Okay, well, looking back at that other chart and plenty of stuff that Tom and Marcia have read, that would not be sustainable. However, something very important to note is that it is possible to have a higher withdrawal rate, even a higher withdrawal rate than this in retirement, if it doesn't last for the entire retirement. So in their case, this high withdrawal rate is going on for 5 years, but then once Marcia claims her Social Security benefit, okay, now that withdrawal rate is dropping from like a 7% to like let's call it 5.5%, okay? Still maybe on the upper end of what the research suggests is kind of a sustainable withdrawal rate, but then you can see that once Tom claims his Social Security benefit, now their withdrawal rate is very, very low. We're talking like 2.5% here withdrawal rates, and that is extremely sustainable. And as we go through time, if we factor in cost of living adjustments to their Social Security benefits, you can see that their withdrawal rate percentage from their portfolio just really goes down over time. They don't have to take out as much. Okay, so with all this in mind, if I were looking at this plan and saying, okay, is this realistic or is this a good plan? First of all, I would say if their number one objective is to have a bulletproof spending plan, then this would be a good plan. But I would not necessarily recommend this plan. I would highly encourage Tom and Marcia to consider a higher spending amount in some way in retirement, whether it's increasing their lifestyle, doing more things, or giving it away or doing something. It's never my role as a retirement planner to tell someone you need to spend more money or this is what you should spend it on. But it's really to help somebody understand the pros and cons and the likely outcomes of different approaches. So one of the things we can do to help them understand kind of their flexibility with spending is to use a guardrail approach. So on the screen in front of us, we are looking at a helpful diagram that shows us their starting portfolio amount, and over here on the right-hand side, how much they could spend from their portfolio. So the way that this works is we're looking at, okay, if they start with $2 million, then this very conservative spending approach, they can easily spend, $12,000 a month. Now, what if the portfolio drops? Okay, so they want to say, what if kind of the worst case scenario, when might we need to adjust the portfolio to stay on track? So let's say their portfolio had about a 30% drop down to 1.4 million. Well, in that case, they should probably consider reducing their spending by about 5%, so $600 per month. So in their world, that would be totally doable. Now on the flip side, this is what I would challenge them. If they were coming to me and saying, okay, we want to start with this, then I would really challenge them and say, well, if that's the case, as your portfolio grows over time, I would strongly encourage you to increase your spending. Maybe do some special trips or help out a family member or do something with the money that's going to increase your quality of life. So on the chart for this upper guardrail, what this is saying is that if their portfolio increases by 6%, then they could realistically increase their spending by 6%. Now you can see that the upper and lower guardrails are not symmetrical. So it's not like a 6% increase and a 6% decrease. They only need a 6% increase in the portfolio to have a spending increase, but they would require a huge drawdown, about 29%, in order for them to be recommended to reduce their spending a little bit. I'd go about this probably one of two ways. One way would be I would encourage them to say, all right, if we're going to use this plan, let's stick to the guardrails really tightly so that when your portfolio, when it actually hits these upper guardrails, let's agree today that you're going to take seriously the idea of actually spending more, okay? And if they're like, awesome, let's do that. Okay, that sounds good to us. Otherwise, I would encourage them to consider just starting with a higher spending amount. In fact, we can diagram that and say, okay, what if we started with an extra couple $100s a month? Okay, so now you're starting with a couple $100s more per month. Now, how does that impact kind of the overall risk profile? Well, now you would need about a 9% increase in your portfolio in order to increase your spending. And on the other side, a smaller decrease would require a reduction in your spending. This is still, frankly, a very conservative plan, very high likelihood that they're gonna need very few downward adjustments in their spending over time, and they're gonna still die with a lot of money, most likely. So we could even look at some other scenarios. For example, what if we started with, an extra $900 a month? Okay, now this isn't quite symmetrical, upward versus downward percentage, increase versus decrease to hit the guardrails, but it is kind of maybe a little more balanced in the sense that it would require a slightly higher increase in the overall portfolio in order to have them increase their spending. And so these are the things that I would encourage a retiree to go through, is to run a risk analysis of their overall spending plan and see what those guardrails are. What is your flexibility for increasing versus decreasing your spending, and making sure that the retirement approach that you decide on is one that is, number one, is going to be realistic and sustainable. You're going to have financial security and a very low risk of running out of money, but also is not too conservative. And by that, I mean too cautious. You don't get an award at the end of your life for dying with a big balance in your Fidelity or, Charles Schwab account. There's no one at the end of life giving you a high five for dying with, $10 million. So you're probably going to have a higher quality of life if you just proactively do stuff with that money while you're alive. And even if you're not going to spend it, like I said, you'll probably get more satisfaction out of giving that money away partially while you're alive rather than waiting until you pass away to give that money away. So I hope this overall retirement scenario has been helpful for you to see some of the pros and cons of different spending approaches, and maybe some of the things that you should consider or that would be helpful to think about as you're preparing for your retirement. How much can I realistically spend? And just how cautious am I being in my spending approach? Is it possible that I could spend more? And am I leaving life on the table? Am I giving up important experiences or being able to do things that I'd want to because I'm being too cautious in my retirement planning approach? So if you'd like some help going through your retirement scenario, feel free to click the link in the description and schedule a one-on-one free consultation with me. I'd be happy to look through your plan and help you find that sweet spot to determine how much you can spend and make the best of your retirement. So with all that in mind, I hope you have a great week, and I will catch you in the next video.